Hey there. For this podcast, we talk about outdoor factors that affect the adventure. These would be things like how rain and temperature can affect how we plan for a hunting or fishing adventure. We discuss a little strategy here and a bit about how it has worked out for us in the past.
That's right, Pat. There are so many variables in the outdoors, so here we try to capture some of the main ones we consider as we approach any outdoor adventure. Also, just as a reminder, to make sure you've subscribed and followed us on Instagram because that's the best way to make sure you never miss a podcast.
All right, thanks for giving us a listen, and without further ado, let's get into the episode. Welcome to the East Coast Hunt, Fish, Hike podcast. I'm Pat Carroll, hunter, fisherman, and general outdoor enthusiast. Join me and my brother Mike as we share tactics, recount stories, and plan our upcoming outdoor adventures. Welcome to the East Coast Hunt, Fish, Hike podcast, your home for stories and tactics in the woods and on the water. I'm Pat Carroll, and I'm joined, as always, by my brother and co-host, Mike. How's it going, Mike?
It's going really well. It's going really well. I'm doing great down here in Georgia. Things are going really well for the Georgia Carol. So we're right into the start of the summer months. So we've got a lot of things to look forward to. Lots of kind of outdoor stuff that's on the horizon. With my wife and I both being teachers, we're kind of brinking into that summer vacation mode, which always takes like a little like a little bit of I don't know. I guess you could say a little bit of time to kind of like transition from one into the other, from being in work mode into being in summer mode. But things are going really well. Things are going well. And yeah, looking forward to some opportunities for some outdoor stuff kind of in the coming months. But how about you, Pat? How are things going with you up north?
No, it's going pretty good. You know, things are starting to warm up here. Still kind of rainy, but starting to get into the 70s a little bit more frequently, and definitely getting outside a little bit more.
Hmm.
But today we're going to be doing some talking about kind of those outdoor factors that affect your adventures once you're outside, right? So these could be things that have an impact on how you plan on going out, as well as things that may cause you to change your plans or maybe have to pivot once you're out in the field or on the water or whatever. And specifically, we're going to be discussing a lot about how things like rain, temperature, and terrain can affect your plan, whether it's hunting or fishing, and as well as how that changes the strategy and what we're gonna do as we get out there, and then what you have to do when you're making those changes and how it impacts your time outside. So should be a pretty good conversation today.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by kind of this intersection of when nature is kind of doing its thing, whether that be with precipitation or with the temperature or with some kind of like aspects of the terrain that we're going to be talking about. That intersection of kind of like nature along with and weather for that matter, along with the kind of the preparation as well as the tactics and how those tactics kind of change is what I'm really fascinated by. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. It's one of those things where it's like nature is gonna nature, and
Yeah.
so when you're out there, there's so much that can change at the drop of a hat, and to a certain extent, that's true for the animals that you're hunting or that you're fishing as well. That these changes that are going to take place in terms of nature, their surroundings, the weather, the temperature, it's going to end up changing how they're adjusting to their nature, and so the ability to be able to kind of use different tactics in order to find yourself some sort of an advantage. I'm really fascinated by that. So I'm looking forward to this conversation, Pat. And I've been looking forward to it for a little while since we've been kind of planning this one. I've been looking to get into some of those intersections of tactics in weather and nature. So So yeah, it should be a good one. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I guess it definitely is going to be a good talk. I was looking at the, what we were planning on discussing and realized that we could probably do a full episode on any one of these topics. So I
Oh,
think
for
we'll have
sure.
to do
Yep.
some sort of follow up deep dive after this
Mhm.
one. So should be good. But before we get into it, we should probably, talk a little bit about social media. So we do have an Instagram. That Instagram is at EC underscore huntfish hike underscore pod. So
Mm.
if you're interested in what we have going on, please follow us there. You can get up to date on what the next episodes are going to be, or share some feedback on that, and rate and review. Please tell us how we're doing. Obviously, it's the best way for us to get feedback from you guys. It helps extend our reach to more listeners. It helps move us up the charts, and also lets us know what you guys want to hear, because then we can cater what we're doing to what you guys want to listen to. So definitely benefits everybody in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. Rate us, review us. Those 5-star ratings kind of help us be one of the podcasts. And when people are clicking on outdoor sports, and when people are interested, as Pat, you and I are, obviously, but if you're listening to this podcast, to a certain extent, you're interested in outdoor sports and outdoor activities and stuff. And so to that end, make sure that you're rating and reviewing. If you like what it is that you hear, then give us a 5-star rating. And it's those types of things that help us be one of the first ones that you're clicking on when you're making your way through, and when other listeners are making their way through the podcast. And if you're not doing so yet, subscribe as well. That way, you're not missing any of the episodes and things that we're putting out there. So definitely consider subscribing to our podcast. So that you don't miss a thing, so that you don't miss any of the episodes when we eventually do go into a deep dive with some of these with some of these weather and kind of nature aspects to hunting and fishing and outdoor sports. You'll be able to make sure that you're up to date with all of it. So I definitely recommend subscribing, so that you don't miss a thing.
Yeah, for sure. So recent outdoor endeavors. Mike, I know we've been discussing a little bit about trying to get outside, the weather getting a little bit nicer. I have had the opportunity to get outside a little bit, so we did have a holiday weekend here recently. I did get the chance to get outside with the kiddos, mostly just running around at a local track, but, anytime you can get outside and have some fun outdoors, it's a lot of fun. And I did manage to find my way over to the local fishing hole. So
Yes.
there's a spot probably about 2 miles from my office. It's just this little, probably about 100 yards across, like 100 yard diameter, like fishing pond, and they do actually stock it with trout, which is pretty cool. I do like that. And I've been looking to try and catch a trout there. But usually what I end up doing is catching some bluegills, throwing a spinner in there and seeing what I can do. Last couple times it's been like Friday after work. I decided, I'll get over there and just, I haven't been able to commit a lot of time, but even like 30 minutes after work is like a huge benefit. So I committed to it. I decided, I was going to do it. And then it turned out that after work that day, it was pouring rain. Like, not even like a little bit of rain, just like pouring down like sheets of rain. And I said, you know what? I said I was going to do it. I'm going to do it anyway. So I popped out to this little lake, grabbed one spinner, threw it on the rod, walked out there with my rod and with the one lure on it, and just started casting into the water. And I caught 2 bluegill in about 20 minutes in the pouring rain. So figured that was pretty good. I did a pretty good job there. I was pretty happy with that. I only had about 30 minutes to spare as far as the amount of fishing time I had, but
Yeah.
I was pretty proud of that. So that was pretty good. I did get the opportunity to do that again. After work, just like another 30-minute little fishing stint, and that was much less successful.
Yeah.
He brought the same lure. It was like the same time of day, but at the same time, it wasn't as lucrative at all. The fish didn't seem to want to bite on that, and I think part of it, we're going to be talking a little bit about rain and precipitation, but I think part of it had to do with the fact that on the sunny day, there was a whole bunch of like little bugs that were flying on the top of the water or landing into the water, and I think the fish, particularly the bluegills, were eating all those bugs, and they did. There was no need for them to search for anything under the water because they had all the
Yeah.
food they needed as topwater, food for lack of a better word. Whereas when it was pouring down rain, the fish can't tell the difference between a water drop and like a bug that's hitting the surface. So those surface foods weren't available to them. So that underwater spinner, which is what I was using, was
Yeah.
like the optimum thing to catch them with because they weren't eating
Yeah.
those top water. So I was, it was pretty. I figured that out the second time, like obviously when I wasn't catching any fish, right? But it was pretty cool to think like, okay, now I understand what's happening here, and now I can maybe leverage this the next time I go fishing, which is pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Wow. That's so interesting to me. And yeah, I know for those listening at home, I know that I oftentimes am the one that's bringing some of the fishing stories for better or for worse to this podcast. Pat's being very modest though. For that day that he was catching those bluegills, he was out there for 20 minutes and he caught two fish. I mean, that's the kind of rate that any fisherman would die for. So good good job to you, Pat, on that. And yeah, whatever it is that you're doing to catch two fish in 20 minutes, I mean, that's pretty much the rate that you dream about.
Hey,
So,
it
um,
was just the right lure on the right day, with the right conditions, right? I mean,
you
that's
know,
always what you're trying to do.
yeah, and it's so funny that you said that you went back out to kind of like the same location, we're using the same lure on a different day, and it's just not successful,
Hmm.
right? And you can spend like 5 hours there, and if you don't have the right lure in the right location with the right conditions, it's just not going to be successful. And I think back to a lot of times my father-in-law has taken we've gone on a couple of guided fishing tours on Lake Hartwell. When we're there, we'll catch 30 to 40 fish. I mean, we're just like bringing things up from the depths of Lake Hartwell. And when it's hitting so fast. It's like bang, bang, bang. There's three different lines that all have fish on them, and it's so exciting and it's so kind of like riveting. And so I think that a lot of times my father-in-law kind of wants to kind of wants to do that for his son-in-laws and for his grandkids, and so he'll bring the fishing boat out to the exact same locations at the exact same time, with oftentimes like the same conditions, same temperature and everything.
Hmm.
And where the guide brought us to that location on a Tuesday and we were catching 40 fish,
Hmm.
we'll come back like skunked, or we'll come back with like two catfish, and so it really is one of those things where it's so dependent upon the like the what it is um that intersection of the tactics and the temperature. And I don't know what the guide is looking for to kind of like get those types of results, but he's kind of like a fish whisperer, and it's so fascinating that he knows before we even get to a spot. It's like, yeah, we're gonna catch at least 15 fish here, and then of course we pull out of there with like 20 fish having been caught.
Yeah.
And so it's just so that's so interesting to me, and it can be very discouraging too sometimes to be like,
Hmm.
I'm doing everything right, I'm doing everything the exact way that I should be to be able to catch the fish. I'm doing the same thing when a couple of days ago I caught two fish within 20 minutes, and now all of a sudden you're not catching anything, so
Yep.
that can be discouraging for sure. But it's one of those things where when you get it right, there's a certain aspect of pride, right? When you get that right lure in the right moment, like at the with the right conditions at the right time when the
Hmm.
fish are there. It's just that's why I love fishing right
Oh
there.
yeah.
That's why it is that I
Absolutely.
love fishing.
No,
you know
it makes perfect sense. But yeah, no, Mike, what have you gotten outside at all? What have you been doing?
Yeah, so for us, a couple of weeks ago, like 2 weeks ago, we had a really hot spell. So things were getting into kind of like the upper 80s down here in Georgia. And so when that happens, I start to look out into my backyard and want to get things done. And when the weather gets a little bit nicer, that's kind of where my mind goes and where my to-do list goes, to be honest with you. And so I've been doing a little bit of work outside, trying to get kind of the lawn to a place that that it's ready to make its way into the summer months. I actually just over the course of the last couple of days built like a little walkway,
Oh, that's fun.
or it's kind of like a pathway that
Hmm.
has some. So actually, you might be able to see it, Pat, if you look through the back window there. I've got
Oh
some
yeah,
kind of
okay.
like some lights that are kind of lining a walkway that's along one of the gardens that I have in the backyard. So I've been doing a little bit of that work, and of course, it's always fun to get the kiddos out there to help with that,
Mhm.
and they're so excited about things like that. But we've been able to go on a number of like really long walks around the neighborhood. We've got some like parks and stuff that are nearby that we've been able to go on walks to. But you were talking about this past holiday weekend, this past Memorial Day weekend, and we took a trip up to the family lake house up on Lake Kiwi in
Oh,
South
nice.
Carolina. So we were up there for a couple of days, and so I was able to get out on the lake and go fishing, which was
Ooh.
really exciting. I took my 3-year-old daughter, not for the first time fishing, but for the first time successfully fishing,
Ah.
out on Lake Kiwi, and she was absolutely beside herself. And we caught a fish. It was one of those things where I had planned on getting out like nice and early in the morning. And
Mhm.
when you're on the lake, you're afforded you have the ability to be able to actually get out there when it is that you want to. So I was paddling by like 6 o'clock,
Mhm.
and I was just rounding the corner, and I remembered that I wanted to tell my wife that I was getting out onto the water, and to let me know when the kids got up, and I would be right around the corner so that I could come back and help.
Mhm.
And when I pulled out my phone, as I was rounding the corner around kind of the dock, I already had a text from my wife saying that our 3-year-old was up, and so I was like, "Shoot! Oh, what do I do?" So I texted back my wife to say, "All right, like I'm turning the canoe around now. It's probably like a 10-foot canoe, I want to say 10, 12 foot canoe." And I was like, "All right, I'm turning the canoe around," and my wife had actually said that like, no, stay out there for a little bit longer. She's the my 3-year-old daughter was snuggling with her in bed, so she said like, enjoy yourself, and then in about 30 minutes or so, you can come back and pick her up
Mhm.
and take her out in the canoe. So I did a little bit of fishing, kind of like rounded the corner. I saw a lot of fish jumping out of the water, but I
Mhm.
wasn't able to catch any at first. And so I took the canoe back. It was probably I lost probably about 30 minutes trying to get my 3-year-old daughter down into the canoe. Um, but we got back down into the canoe. She had got her life vest on, and we were paddling around the corner, and we must have been no more than 15 yards from the dock.
Mhm.
And I had a line that I had cast out that I was trolling with just around the corner to go to my favorite point in the world, on Lake Kiwi. And the tip went down. I said my daughter's name, and then I called out like, "Oh, I think we got a fish!" And she was so excited. And I started reeling it in, and sure enough, we had probably about like a 9 inch or so spotted bass that was on the end of the line,
Hey,
and
there you
she
go.
was so thrilled. I got a picture of it, and then when I was kind of like lowering it down into kind of like into the boat, she was a little bit squirmish and didn't want to get too close with it.
Mhm.
But I was able to get it off the hook and kind of like wiggled its way off the hook and got it back into the lake. Uh, she was disappointed that it wasn't quite big enough for us to be able to eat and keep
Ah,
and eat.
well, yes, what
But
can you do?
because she does like her fish, but we let it go, and then I took the next probably like hour and a half with her out on the lake, and it was amazing. I
Nice.
will say that catching that fish within the first 5 minutes of being out in the canoe certainly led her to be saying, "Daddy, why aren't we catching more fish? Daddy, I thought that we'd be catching more fish than this. Daddy, why have we only caught one fish?" It certainly led her to believe that we'd be catching fish every 5 minutes, which
Yep.
is just certainly not the case. The last two times before that I had gone out on the lake, I had gotten skunked, and so it was hard for me to impress upon her how rare it is that we're catching a
Mhm.
fish in the first 5 minutes of going out onto the lake. But nevertheless, she was thrilled, and we were able to have a successful fishing trip. And we've got the picture to prove it. So it was documented, and it was really awesome to be able to catch that fish with her.
Wow, that's great. That's an awesome story. I definitely
Yeah.
wanna try and, try and take my kids out on the canoe this year. I don't
Yeah.
know if we'll be as lucky. Our canoe launch is quite a distance from where I usually catch fish on our lake.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we'll be able to catch one in the first 5 minutes, but definitely wanna give that a try as we move into the summer months here.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I think that will be something definitely a goal on my fishing goals list this year.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so let's move into some of these factors that are going to affect the adventure. So, first one up is going to be rain, and then I said slash precipitation because as we get into the colder months, right, that rain turns into snow. So that's obviously a little bit less of an issue for you guys down in
Yep.
Georgia,
Hmm.
but up here, obviously in Massachusetts, New England area, snow is a very real thing, and we frequently see it. Ah, we used to frequently see it in December a lot. I mean, we definitely don't see as much snow now as we used to, but it's definitely certainly something that is something that you deal with in the woods during hunting season. So the first thing just to discuss is basically planning for the rain, right? So how do you plan to be outside in the woods and in the rain? And a couple things that I like to remember as we're moving into the woods, when it's going to be raining out. And the first thing is layering. So making sure that you have enough clothes and enough layers on that you're not going to get cold, right? Staying warm is
Yep.
obviously the thing that's going to keep you in the woods longer, keep you focused on what you're doing. If you're going to be cold out there, your time out there, one, is not going to be very pleasant, and two, you're gonna call it quits because you're either your toes are freezing or your hands are freezing. Something's going to happen that's going to keep you make you turn tail and head back to the car a little bit sooner than you normally would.
Yeah.
But having a good waterproofing layer on the outside, right? So like either like a rain jacket or something that's going to wick that water away to keep it from getting to your warm clothes is super beneficial. Also having wool underneath, right? So wool base layers is super nice in this regard too, because if your wool base layers get wet, it's still warm, and that's
Yeah.
something
Hmm.
that if you have, like, obviously cotton is not going to be beneficial, right? Because once it gets wet, you're going to freeze. Having something that's going to either wick that water away or something that's going to stay warm once it's wet
Hmm.
is majorly beneficial in that regard.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's making me think of all of the like skiing and snowboarding trips that we've done too. And while I don't have the same experience with kind of like wet clothing when it comes to kind of like snow out hunting that you have, Pat,
Hmm.
I do have a lot of experience going out west and having ski trips and stuff like that, where the temperatures are cold, or even honestly, the some of the coldest skiing that I've done has actually been in New England,
Hmm.
skiing in the east, and there have been some days, Pat, where you and I have been out there on the slopes and it's been in the negatives. It's
Hmm.
been, I think it was one year we went on a family trip up to like Bretton Woods or something like that, and it was like negative 17 degrees or something like that. It's just crazy, crazy
Yep.
cold. And so when you're out there on the slopes and you're skiing, like there's obviously so much snow that's around you that like it's both that balance of staying warm but also wanting to stay dry. And so
Hmm.
you need to have clothes that can get wet and still keep you warm, because if you don't, and these clothes are not like wool and they're getting wet, it can be dangerous, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
so
absolutely.
to a certain extent, you gotta kind of be you gotta be mindful of stuff like that. So I'm sitting over here hearing you talk about it as it pertains to hunting, but another outdoor sport, things like skiing and snowboarding and stuff like that. For those listeners at home that are more familiar with those, I think that the same kind of concepts apply. That it's still kind of like wanting to stay both dry and also warm. And when you're in a situation where you're not going to be able to stay as dry as a bone, then being able to have clothes that are okay getting wet, and still keeping you warm is imperative.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's totally true. And the other thing that you got to kind of keep in mind is like how much activity are you planning on doing, right? So like obviously when you're like skiing or
True.
snowboarding, right? You're working up a sweat while you're moving down the mountain, right? Which
Yeah.
that activity is ultimately going to be doing a good job of keeping you warm as well. So like
Mhm.
that's a difference, right? If you're going to just be sitting in a tree stand for let's say, a full day would be like eight plus hours, right? So if you're going to
Mhm.
just be sitting there for 8 plus hours, you do have to, plan on what you're going to be wearing a little bit differently than you would if you're going to be active as well too.
That
But
is so true. It's almost like in the skiing analogy that I've kind of walked us down here.
mhm,
It's almost like you would need to be dressing to be up on the ski lift for like 4 hours at a pop.
yeah.
You know, it's not the same as having all of that activity and all of that physical exertion that's going to be kind of getting your muscles going and keeping you a little bit warmer from the inside out. You're kind of stuck up on the ski lift, stuck up in the chair there. Open to the elements,
Yep.
and so it's kind of a different world that you're trying to prepare for there. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and ultimately it depends on what kind of hunting you're planning on doing, right? So, I mean, obviously, if you're going to be tracking or you're going to be still hunting, right, you're going to be moving through the woods a little bit more. You're not going to have to layer quite as much as you would
Yeah,
if you were going to be, just sitting there all day.
yeah,
But that also goes into strategy too, and how you go about planning if it's going to be raining, right?
mhm,
So one thing I like to do in general is that I like to have a different stand for the morning than you do for the afternoon, right? So that
yeah,
means that as far as like maximum number of hours that you're going to be sitting in one stand, it's probably closer to like 4 as opposed to 8, right? So that
yeah,
gives you that opportunity to get up in the middle of the day and walk to your other stand. What you're doing,
mhm,
you're increasing your odds that you're going to see a deer because you're potentially moving to an area that has a higher likelihood of the deer being there, but you're
mhm,
also building up that heat in your body because you're walking over there. You're burning those calories, getting yourself warmed up a little bit. And then the other thing that I'll do sometimes if it's going to be extra cold or extra rainy is I'll throw another set of clothes in the car, and that
smart.
way you
Yeah,
can throw you if you're like totally soaked to the bone, you can go back to the car, swap on some new clothes, even turn on your car, warm it up for a little bit, get that chill out of your body, and then hit the second sit in the afternoon, being a little bit
yeah,
more comfortable, a little bit more warm, and you don't have to worry about freezing or being soaked for the rest of the
mhm,
time, which is a huge benefit. And then I added a couple other points on rain, like planning for rain. These pertain mostly to, firearms, but one is like scope covers. So obviously, if it's raining or snowing, like how is that going to impact your scope if you're using one, right? So a lot
yeah.
of the times what'll happen is if you're not running scope covers, you can get some rain, some snow in your scope, and then in that opportune moment when the deer is passing in front of you, you pull that
Oh
gun up to take a
gosh.
shot and you can't see anything, right? Because
Yeah.
there's either rain or snow right on there. So you got to be mindful of that if you're planning on hunting in any sort of precipitation. And then as well, along with that, muzzle loaders are prone to getting moisture inside of the
Mhm.
gunpowder, and once that happens, you pull that trigger to try and take that shot, and instead of going bang, it goes click, right? So
Yeah. Oh
you don't
gosh.
have the opportunity to you don't have that opportunity anymore because you didn't keep that powder dry, right? So just things to be mindful moving into moving when you're planning for a situation where there's going to be precipitation in the woods.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, let me ask you this. So, when it comes to kind of the temperature and the cold and the extra clothes and stuff that it is that you have on, does it ever end up impacting like your maneuverability in the stand to the point that you end up kind of like being more limited in a severe way in what it is that you're able to do? Like, does all these extra layers of clothing, or could there potentially be the opportunity for things to be so cold that you're fearful that when you get that one shot at the deer that it is that you have um, that you're not able to make the most of it because of kind of a lack of maneuverability or a lack of kind of like flexibility? Does there come to be any kind of like limitations that are put on you in the stand as a result of either the extra clothing or the cold or the temperatures, or what to what extent does that play a factor?
Yeah, so I mean, I think when you're in the stand, right? I mean, the one thing that clothing is going to do is obviously add more bulk, right? So
Mhm.
that can have an impact, specifically if you're shooting like a standard like compound bow or
Yeah, yeah, that's
traditional
what I was
bow, right?
thinking.
So
Yeah.
what happens, right, is occasionally if you have too much clothes or it's too bulky, it will affect like how you draw or potentially
Mhm,
your anchor point, right? Which could have impact on how that shot is taken or
mhm,
your accuracy as well. The key there is just to make sure that if you're planning on wearing a lot of clothing in the stand, practice using some of those clothing as well,
Yeah.
right? So
Hmm.
that you have the experience, oh, because I'm wearing these layers, I've shot my bow with these before, so
Yeah.
it shouldn't really have much of an impact on what my shot's going to look like. Or likewise, right? I mean, if it is going to have an impact, knowing that and changing what you're going to be wearing ahead of time, so you know that it's not going to be a problem, right?
Yeah.
And then
That
also in.
you know, I'm gonna make a really kind of like strange analogy here, but this is the way that my mind works. I'm thinking about like as a football coach over here, I'm thinking about like the Chicago Bears or the Green Bay Packers or something like that, who like pride themselves in not wearing sleeves out in like really cold games. Like sometimes it'll be down into like the teens or into the single digits, and football games are still
Mhm,
going on. And there's kind of like an element of pride of not having like these sleeves that like the linemen have or
mhm,
that linebackers have or something like that. But to a certain extent, there's kind of a similar thing going on there where there's coaches that want for their players to kind of like practice in the bulkier gear and to be prepared for kind of the colder weather. And I think that there's kind of like a similarity there with some of those cold weather teams in the NFL and in college football
mhm,
and high school football, of course. But that where you got to kind of like practice in what it is that you're going to be competing in. And
mhm,
in the world of outdoor sports, your competition, you're competing is in hunting, right?
mhm,
So if you're up in the stand and you're not used to kind of what that feels like as you're drawing back your bow with those added layers, I'm sure that there are hunters that are kind of like pride themselves as well on keeping themselves as kind of like limited as possible when it
mhm,
comes to their layers so that they can get off that perfect shot when that time comes. But I think that there's like pride aside, I think that there's kind of an element to what it is that you're saying, Pat, to practicing in what it is that you're going to be kind of like competing in. And again, when you're competing in hunting, you're talking about whether you're going to end up making that shot or not. And so I see some similarities there. Maybe it's just me. I don't know, but
Yeah,
but, but
no.
I but I certainly see some similarities there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, ultimately, what you're competing against nature, right? So it's
Yeah.
just
Mhm.
trying to, what can you do to maximize your opportunity when that opportunity strikes, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, that's exactly true. I mean, I think there obviously are people who pride themselves on not having, not wearing all the layers and stuff like that. But it all depends on, what your comfort level is, what you need. I mean, it's a very personal thing. One guy, needs extra feet warmers, where another person,
Yeah.
just standard hiking boots are going to be fine. So
Mhm.
it's all kind of depends on the person. But in addition to how you plan for being outside in the precipitation of the rain, the other question is, how does this rain impact the hunt, as well as like the deer once it's in the woods, right? So firstly, as far as once you're in the stand, right, rain is going to impact your hearing quite a bit. So obviously, if it's raining outside, right, you hear the rain dropping on all the leaves and the branches and stuff like that. If a deer is walking at the same time, you're not going to hear that. All you're going to hear is the rain. So you got to be very focused on what you're looking at and what you're seeing, to be able to pick up on any deer that may be around. Likewise, right, if it's windy or something like that, right, branches are
Yeah.
going to be moving. I mean, your opportunities for seeing a deer are also limited as well, because
Uh-huh.
there's just generally speaking more movement in the woods, so it makes that a little bit more challenging. Usually, but not often, deer are going to lay down in the rain. So they're gonna, kind of take that opportunity to rest, because one, if you can't hear a deer when it's moving around, a deer's not going to be able to hear anything else either, right? So that gives they're at a little bit more risk, right? If a predator is walking and they can't hear it, then they're at risk of getting eaten by
Yeah.
a coyote or
Uh-huh.
a bear or whatever, right? So they're at a little bit more of a disadvantage in that regard. But deer will, however, whenever the rain stops, generally speaking, they're going to get back up on their feet. They're going to start
Yeah.
moving. They're going
Uh-huh.
to feed, because they have been laying down while it was raining, right? And the same thing will happen sometimes before a storm as well. So like right before like a storm, the barometric pressure is going to change, right? And the
Yeah.
deer can pick up on that. They understand that's an indication that a storm's coming. So what they'll do is get on their feet and start eating immediately before the rain happens. And I've seen that happen a couple times, where I've been in the woods either right before a storm happens or right after a storm
Yeah.
happens,
Uh-huh.
and I've seen deer and like on those occasions. So it's like being able to, and sometimes you can't predict, like when it's immediately going to stop raining, right? Because it doesn't necessarily have to be like the end of the storm. It could just be a break in the action. Even a stop in rain for like 15 minutes could be enough to get those deer on their feet. So sometimes it's worth it to just be in the woods during the rain so that when it happens to stop, you're in that position to be able to take advantage of that opportunity, which is something I've taken advantage of before, for sure.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, right? So that's just for like if you're going to be sitting in a tree stand. But wet ground can be also super helpful if you're planning on stalking or still hunting. And that's because it
Yeah.
gives you, as I was saying before, right, the deer are at a disadvantage because they can't hear. You can use
Hmm.
that to your advantage if you're planning on still hunting or stalking because they can't hear you. You can walk through that woods and the deer aren't going to know that you're coming up on them. So it provides a huge advantage for you to be able to sneak up on a deer where you wouldn't be able to do that before.
Yeah, and so you got to kind of like time that though, and as you're saying, it's hard to kind of predict when it is that that's going to be. But if you can manage to kind of put yourself in the woods either before a storm is coming, and kind of like put yourself in a position where you're able to be in a place while the deer are moving around, I imagine that that's something that you can kind of like use to your advantage. I got the image of the golfer in Caddyshack, like in the midst of the storm that's going out there, right? But it's kind of the same thing
It
where
is.
you're trying to kind of like put yourself out into the woods, and you're kind of putting yourself up against a storm that's going to be coming. You know that a storm is going to be coming, but you also know that this is the best hole of golf that you or the best round of golf that you've ever done, and you're trying to kind of like put yourself in a position to be able to get that deer. So again, I see some similarities with that. But the kind of the ability to be able to put yourself in the right position at the right time, especially when you know that they're going to be that deer are going to be up and about in the kind of the before a storm comes or right in the aftermath of a storm, that can be really helpful to you. But also that puts you in the woods during a storm or right before a storm or right
Yes.
immediately after a storm, which is not necessarily the safest or the best kind of maneuver.
Yeah.
And so there's some challenges and stuff that comes up with that
For
too.
sure.
But
Yeah, you're weighing like comfort as well as safety, right? Like
yeah,
can I maintain being soaking wet and not freezing? Is this a safe choice or is it like, 40-mile-an-hour winds and trees are falling, right? Like that's not a situation you want to be in either. So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like the benefits of having potentially additional deer movement or the quiet walking around versus, that comfort slash safety of potentially being in the woods during a storm.
Yeah, but I think that it's the same for the animals too, right? I
Mm-hmm.
would I would imagine that like they're in the midst of like a storm or before a storm or after a storm, they're hungry, and I mean
Mm-hmm.
they're animals, so they want to eat, and I'm sure in the rut there are other things that are on their mind too,
Yes.
and so to a certain extent, like does the rain impact their willingness to eat or to kind of like pursue a doe in the midst of the rut? Or is that something, and is that something that kind of you can use to your advantage if you know that the storm is done, and so you know that these animals are hungry or that they're in the midst of the rut, and so they only have a certain amount of time to be able to pursue these like animalistic needs. Can you kind of like use that to your advantage, and does the rain kind of impact that?
Yeah, so I mean, as far as the rut goes, the rain's not going to impact that a whole lot. I mean, the deer are thinking so much about breeding at that point that the rain, yeah, it may decrease movement to some degree. I mean, I think on a whole, there's going to be some decrease of movement, but at the same time, the deer are still going to be up. They're still going to be doing what they need to be doing, and I don't think it's going to really have too much of a major impact on what's
I'm
going
just
on there.
laughing at the thought of these deer out there in like a thunderstorm in the midst of this rut in order to kind of like as I'm saying, the like risk the storm in order for them to pursue other desires. So
Hey,
it's
it's just
it's
like
just,
those
it's just
college guys at the bar, right? I mean, they're gonna
right.
they're gonna risk
Oh
it
my god.
for what they need to make happen. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, but as far as food goes, the rain is the deer is still going to lay down during the rain. In some instances, especially if you're talking about precipitation in the colder months,
Yeah.
if it snows or rains for an extended period of time, those deer are going to have to get up anyway. They can't just
Mhm.
lay down for a week straight if it's going to be, really snowy or really rainy, right? So they're going to have to get up. They're just going to minimize the amount, not necessarily the amount of time they're up, but like the location, right? So instead of,
Yeah.
walking really far distances, they may just keep it to a close location around where they're bedding and eat mostly the food that's around there at that
Yeah.
point, right? So it's just kind of, it will change their behavior, but not like not majorly, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, like a couple examples of this, right? It's like last year when I was hunting, I decided to go in. It was like a light rain in the morning. I used that to my advantage, getting into the tree stand very quietly. There I could practically hear a pin drop because everything was wet, but it wasn't like actively
Mhm.
like raining. So that was a huge advantage for me. I got into the stand, got the first light. It started to sprinkle a little bit. Probably rained for about 30 minutes, and probably after that 30 minutes of rain, the rain stopped. Still kind of cloudy, and then I would say probably 10 to 15 minutes after that rain stopped, I saw a doe sneaking through the brush, probably about 50 yards away from me. So that
Yeah.
was, just more evidence that as that right at that point when that rain is stopping, that's a
Yeah.
perfect time
Mhm.
where those deer are going to be on their feet and trying to feed a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then a few years back, this was a late season hunt actually. I got some time right after work. I had a couple hours to head into the woods, just try and last ditch effort, trying to get that deer, and it happened to be like right before a snowstorm, so it was like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was probably going to start snowing around 8 p.m. that night. So I got in. I was just sitting on the ground that night, and right at last light, saw the deer start to walk right towards me. Hadn't seen many deer in that area previously, but I think the fact that a snowstorm was going to be happening that evening was forcing those deer to get up on their feet,
Yeah.
eat a little bit of
Mhm.
food
Makes
before
sense.
they lay down to sit out the rest of that storm. So, just a few examples of how that rain or precipitation can impact how those deer are moving.
Yeah, and you mentioned this a little bit, but is that because of like a change in temperature? You mentioned like the barometric pressure changes, and everybody, the last time that we went on a guided fishing tour on Lake Hartwell, we were driving by a farm that had all of these cows that were laying down right kind of like before the storm was supposed to be coming, and so we were of course in the car as we were driving to the lake talking about whether that meant good things or bad things for the fishing. It's it's funny. It's like you're bringing in all of these natural factors to try and like conjure up whatever you think is gonna whatever it is that it's gonna mean for the fishing trip. But like, is that kind of what it is that that these animals are picking up on, particularly deer during the hunting season that you're trying to hunt? Is it like barometric pressure that they're kind of sensing? Is that why it is that they're kind of like sensing, ooh, there's a storm coming. I better go ahead and get myself fed now so that I'm kind of safe and comfortable while throughout the storm. Is that kind of what's going on?
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, ultimately, these deer don't have the weather channel, right? They can't, look and see like,
Yeah.
oh, there's going to be a storm in a few days, right? The barometric pressure is what's going to indicate to them, is there a storm system coming through? Is there going to be
Yeah.
a major change in the weather patterns, right? So that's
Mhm.
in that regard, that's kind of what they're keying in on. Likewise with temperature, right? So if there's a major temperature swing, probably like 10 plus degrees from the average, right? Then that's going to usually get the deer on their feet for a couple reasons. One being that the temperature is different. It's indicating that there might be a difference going on here. It might be a good idea to eat some food. But at the same time, that's also generally those temperature shifts go along with barometric pressure changes. So it's kind of like a chicken and the egg. Is it the temperature? Is it the barometric pressure? Ultimately, it's really those changes in weather that are getting those deer back on their feet.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. That totally makes sense. And you can use that to your advantage to a certain degree,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can kind of know, while they don't have the weather Channel app or the Weather Channel, we do, right? And so
Yeah.
we can kind of use that to our advantage. We know that there's a storm coming in. We know favorably so, at least, kind of what it is that they're going to be doing in the midst of that weather front or whatever it
Hmm.
is that's going to be coming in. So we can kind of use that to our advantage to be able to. Um, I don't want to necessarily say outsmart them, but to kind of like try to predict so that our tactics can be in alignment with what nature is doing,
Yeah.
which again is
Ultimately,
kind of the point of this.
yeah. No. Ultimately, what it does is it gives you one more piece of evidence or one more thing to compile to hopefully give you a little bit better odds when you're facing those deer, right? I mean, ultimately, the
Yeah.
odds are going to be in their favor pretty much all the time. You're just looking to get a couple percentage points back in your favor here and there, right? And that's just another thing that can do that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
Mike,
absolutely.
as we move into fishing, does precipitation have a similar impact on fishing as it does to hunting?
I mean, yeah, yeah, it definitely does. It's it's interesting because when it comes to like planning for rain and kind of the preparation that you can do. Similarly, it's funny you say that like we have the weather app, we have the like the weather channel so that we can know what it is that is coming down the line in terms of weather. When you need to put in your personal days a week in advance, it can be tricky to kind of like try and or at least a week in advance,
Mm-hmm.
right? So a lot of times I'm trying to, and that's when I do a lot of my spring and fall time fishing is based off of like personal days that I'll take, and I'll go and try and make my way up to the lake, and do a little bit of fishing in the morning before I like to be up there before sunrise so that I can be out there right at first light. But it can be hard to kind of predict as much as we have the apps and we have all of the technology. Sometimes it doesn't always align with even what it is that it's saying that it's going to do a week and a half in advance.
Oh yeah.
And so there's a certain level of frustration that ends up kind of presenting itself in instances like that because obviously it's a different experience if you're out there in the midst of a thunderstorm and it's not safe, right?
No.
If you're out there in a kayak or in a canoe, out in the middle of a lake in a thunderstorm, I mean that's just outright not a safe situation. So
Mm-hmm.
so it can kind of like alter your plans to the point of not being able to go fishing.
Yeah.
But certainly there's a role that it is that it plays. um, when it comes to kayaking and fishing and canoeing and being out on the water, I mean, it's really hard. A lot of times because it can be kind of like we're saying with the cold, it can be kind of a dangerous situation sometimes when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to the harder precipitation, when it comes to thunderstorms. You're really not supposed to be out there for obvious reasons out there in a kayak in the middle of the lake. And so it's one of those things where at the surface in the midst of a thunderstorm, it can be doing anything that it wants to on the surface. Nature can be naturing all it wants to up on the surface, but it doesn't change anything for the fish because the
Yeah.
fish are underneath the surface. The fish are down in the water. So I mean, the to a certain extent, I mean, obviously it does end up affecting the fish. They do different things during a thunderstorm
Mm-hmm.
than they do when it's 90 degrees out in the middle of summer. But at the same time, the world that you're experiencing up on the top of the lake as you're trying to catch these fish, and looking at those storm clouds as they're rolling in, is a different world than what the fish is experiencing underneath the surface. And so that is a big difference from hunting,
Mm-hmm.
right? In hunting, you as the hunter are experiencing the same precipitation that
Yeah.
in the same kind of like weather, the same naturing,
Mm-hmm.
that the deer is. For the fish, that's not the case. For the fish, that's actually the exact opposite. You can be like fearful for your life as a storm's coming in, and the fish are no the wiser underneath the surface. So it is different for the fish, and I think that that's kind of like an important aspect of this. Um, with that said, there are still kind of like factors that you can play into in terms of preparation, and knowing if there's a storm that's kind of out on the horizon, or knowing kind of what your ability is going to be like on the top of the water, you can kind of use that, not necessarily to your advantage, but you can use that to kind of put yourself in the best position on that particular day with that particular weather to be able to catch fish. And so, like location in terms of proximity of your paddle, in terms of the forecast, if I know that there's going to be a storm that's going to be coming, I'm not going to be going down, like 2 miles down into like the body of the lake, down like south into the middle of Lake Kiowee. If I know that there's going to be a storm coming, I'm going to be a lot more likely to kind of like keep my proximity a lot closer to home.
Mm-hmm.
And so the proximity of the paddle is going to end up playing a role there, and that oftentimes can be kind of like location dependent upon the forecast. When it comes to clothing, it's funny that you're talking about like layering and layering with wool. Obviously, when you're out there, out on the lake and there's precipitation that's coming, you want things that are water resistant.
Mm-hmm.
Though there's not always all that much that you can do. Like if you get kind of like caught in the rain when you're out there, you're making the decision that you're going to be withstanding like an hour's worth of drizzle. There's like whatever clothes it is that you're wearing are going to be like sopping wet,
Mm-hmm.
and so there, to a certain extent, there's not always a lot that you can do.
Yeah.
But it's funny because you're talking about like putting on the layers. Like I'm doing a lot more like unlayering actually when it comes to rain. And that's because a lot of the fishing that it is that I'm doing is during the spring, summer, and fall months
Mm-hmm.
in Georgia, and in South Carolina. And so for me, the temperatures aren't as much of a concern. So a lot of times I don't want all of those layers. In fact, I'll have like a really thin water resistant jacket, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
take off my underlayers, and I'll just be wearing like a thin jacket or a thin like fishing jacket or a thin fishing shirt,
Mm-hmm.
something that I know is water resistant, so it's not going to be like soaking through and kind of like weighing down on me as I'm trying to paddle. But I'm unlayering while you're layering. I'm trying to get those layers off from underneath me. I just want the thinnest water resistant thing that it is that I can wear. And so oftentimes if I'm not concerned about the temperature, then I'll have on like either shorts or something like water resistant that I'll be wearing in terms of pants. And then I'll have on like a jacket without anything on underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to be water resistant, and I actually don't want that water soaking through to the things that I have on underneath it. I would in some instances rather not have those layers on, especially when they get wet, underneath whatever it is that I have that's water resistant on top. So I'm kind of unlayering while you're
Nice.
putting those layers on. But again, kind of that proximity, kind of like a lot of times when I'm kayaking, I'm kind of keeping myself close to the coast anyways. But when it comes to kind of like storms, you can have some luck with some of those kind of like overhanging spots, that are kind of like close to home. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times when it's raining, you can find yourself a little kind of like watering hole. You can find yourself a little kind of like inlet that will
Mm-hmm.
have some overhanging trees and that will have some kind of oftentimes food or grub that's kind of falling from the trees that these fish might, in the aftermath of a storm, be interested in eating. I like to call it gravity grub that ends up kind of like falling off of the trees and making its way to the fish that are kind of like surface striking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have a couple of spots that are like that right in the aftermath of a storm, it's kind of I've got that Caddyshack image in my head and I can't get rid of it. But like right after a storm, if you're going out there even in the midst of a storm or right after a storm into one of those spots, you can have some luck kind of with some surface lures, with fish that are in the aftermath of a storm trying to be successful there. Another thing that you can change up, because the world on the surface is different than the world underneath the surface. If you have a boat that has kind of like an overhang, that's one obvious kind of way that you can put yourself in a more comfortable position. Obviously, you need the means to be able to do that. I don't have a fishing boat, but my father-in-law does, and so I'm thinking back to Labor Day a couple of years ago. where I just wanted one last fishing trip out there, and my father-in-law, we were up at the lake house on a Labor Day weekend, and we got up at the crack of dawn and put ourselves out there in the boat. We caught probably like 3 or 4 fish each, right in the midst of this like really like we kind of made our way through the storm, right? So we were there
Nice.
at the start of the storm, catching some fish that were feeding before the storm,
Mhm.
and then throughout the storm, and then after the storm as well. And we were kind of just like trolling right along the coast, but we were comfortable because we had the overhang that was there on the fishing boat. Obviously, if I was out there in a kayak or a canoe on the same day, I wouldn't have been as comfortable. I wouldn't have been able to have the same. Kind of like breath in terms of how far I was going to be able to go as I would in the fishing
Mhm.
boat, and I ultimately wouldn't have had the same amount of luck as I'm convinced that I had on that Labor Day weekend. But it's one of those things where if you have the means to have a boat that has coverage, well,
Yeah.
now you can put yourself in a position where the fish are going to be doing the same thing. They're still going to be feeding at the same time, and so you can put yourself in a position where you're kind of homeostasis. You're trying to kind of like get the top of the water the same as the underneath the water, and you
Mhm.
can do that with a fishing boat. But the impact of rain, I think sometimes like timing your fishing right around the rain, you can kind of have some luck with that, right?
Mhm.
Actually, this past weekend when I brought my 3-year-old daughter out there onto the lake, it had stormed that night before,
Mhm.
and so it actually was kind of like raining and started and sort of kind of drizzling still up until like 5 o'clock in the morning, and so the 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock hour kind of cleared things up, and so it was kind of the perfect
Oh,
situation,
nice.
timing right after a storm to be able to be successful. Now, I like to think that if I wasn't turning back around and losing some of those precious sunrise hours to in order to go and get water, that I might have been more successful and caught a couple more fish. But ultimately, we caught a fish right in kind of like the 6:45 time period,
Mhm.
right around sunrise when the fish are feeding, right in the aftermath of a storm. And so, if you can kind of time it around those storms, I think that you can kind of find yourself some luck there, and that's what I was able to do this last weekend. So it's always great when you can kind of intersect what it is that you think that the animal is going to be doing, whether it's fish or deer, when you can kind of intersect what you think they're going to be doing with kind of the tactics that come into play. Um, Ultimately, I was getting out onto the lake either way,
Mhm.
but when you can kind of find those moments where you can have the tactics intersecting with what the nature is doing and what it is that you're planning on doing with your hunt or with your fish, that's I think where you can put yourself at a little bit of an advantage, which is the business that we're in here. So
Yeah. Now, when you're, yeah, I heard you talking about these gravity grubs, right? These insects that are falling off the trees that the fish are
yeah.
naturally eating. Do you take advantage of that and utilize a lure that's going to be more of like a top water lure, or do you tend to stick with what's been working for you previously?
I should. I should change it up more than I do. I've had a lot of success with kind of like the false minnows that I
Hmm.
have. The I you know it depends. I think that for me, it's more dependent upon the location.
Hmm.
And so I think you're absolutely right. When you're in that particular location underneath these gravity grub that are falling, and it would be in my best interest to kind of like use a lure that would be beneficial in that spot. Sometimes I get in my own head and think to myself, well, every cast that I'm doing with this different uh, with this different form of bait or with this different lure that I'm using that I'm less accustomed to using, well, that's a cast that I'm not getting with something that I've caught like dozens of fish on before, And so for me, it is like I should do it a lot more.
Yeah.
And when it comes to kind of like location based lures, I'm comfortable with what it is that I'm comfortable with, but I should mix it up a lot more. And Pat, I can actually learn from you a little bit on that. I know that you've caught fish with kind of like fake worms, like
Hmm.
little like decoy worms or little fake worms. I know the original brand that we used to use was like Konami,
Hmm.
that we had got with Dad forever ago in Walmart when we were like 10 years
Yep.
old, which it was like a lifetime ago. But those Konami worms that you used, when you came down to Lake Kiwi, this was probably at this point like 7 or 8 years ago. But we were right in the aftermath of a storm, and we were out on my father-in-law's old fishing boat, and you were using that lure in a spot that I still point out. In fact, we were out on the lake this past weekend, like making our way past a during kind of like a very slow for the little kiddos, like
Hmm.
a little tube ride, and I pointed out to my 3-year-old daughter, like, that's the spot where Uncle Pat caught that fish on that fake worm. My father-in-law still talks about that story, Pat, every time we go by that spot,
That's so
because
funny.
he doesn't use like fake worms like that the way that you do. But we were out there in the aftermath of a storm, right on a peninsula, that it
Hmm.
was advantageous for some fish that we're going to be feeding right along that point, right underneath kind of like an overhang of some trees that would be dropping some grub, and you used that as an opportunity to use the right lure in the right instance, and you caught a fish. You caught a
Hmm.
really nice fish. It was like a 13-inch spotted bass that you ended up catching in that spot, and it's one of those things that I remember now. I know from having fished with you before that that's kind of like your MO, that you use a lot of kind
Yeah.
of like those fake worms. But it was a situation where you had the right lure in the right spot at the right moment, and you were able to catch a fish, which is like, honestly, Pat, I mean, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Like that synchronization is something that, like, at some point I'm going to write a book about. There are so many times where I'm out there on the lake and I'm out there on a kayak, and I'm casting these different lures, and I'm trying to catch these different fish. And I've had this thought process before that I'm convinced that fishing is a lot like poetry, right? In poetry, you need to like mirror the right way that a word sounds, with the right punctuation, with the right word, with the right meaning, with the right intonation. And when you find that perfect moment, like, you can create an effect in literature, in poetry, that is like unmatched.
Hmm.
Well, that's the same thing with fishing. When you have the right lure and the right situation and the right depth, with the right terrain, with the right storm and the right temperature, I mean, you can end up catching like a fish, and that's something that's so cool. That I mean, I'm making like all the connections this episode, Pat. We're talking about Caddyshack, and now we're talking about poetry, right? But I do like, that's what I love about this, is that like there's an aspect of being able to kind of like put all these things together in a moment that the marriage of all of that can be you catching a 13-inch spotted bass out on that point with a lure that my father-in-law never would have thought of, right? And we still talk about that, Pat, every time we drive, but we make like that the boat drives by that point. He or I will bring that up. Now, he's currently like in a different country right now on like an anniversary trip with his
Hmm.
wife, so he wasn't there to be able to say it, but I did it. I said to my 3-year-old daughter, I was like, that's where Uncle Pat caught that fish with that worm, with that fake worm. So I really love that about. I love that about fishing, and I love that about outdoor sports, and so you can kind of get a little bit more of that marriage there when you're linking up the right lure with the right spot. And so to this is short story long, I like to say, but I don't do as much of it as I should. But that'll be something that I know that I can grow from as I kind of move forward.
Nice. Yeah. No, I think that's the thing that I actually really find a lot of pleasure in, for lack of a better word, is that finding the reason why like a fish might bite on one lure versus another. Like, what is the reason? Why? Like, if you're seeing a lot of success with one
Mhm.
particular lure, what's the reason? And then like figuring that out is like where I find a lot of enjoyment there.
Yeah,
So.
and in the kind of like the beforehand, when you're going to a new spot or you're going to a new lake and wanting to kind of like figure out what the fish are eating and what it is that they're consuming, and trying to find your lure or whatever it is that you're using as your bait to match that as precisely as possible. And that's what I have found with this. I know that we've, if you listen back maybe listeners at home, if you listen back like another 3 or 4 episodes ago and you heard me talking about that shad, that Rapala
Mm-hmm.
lure, it looks just like a tiny little spotted bass, which is exactly what these spotted bass are eating, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's what it is that they're consuming. And so it looks like a little minnow, it looks like a little like bait minnow. And so it looks and operates it, I mean, it even moves through the water at the right depth and at the right movement, the way that a spotted bass would. And so it looks just like what it is that they're eating and what it is that they're consuming. And so I kind of, through trial and error, landed on that lure, but it's the one that I use the most. It's the one that I caught a fish on this past weekend with. So it is definitely one of those things that I'm comfortable with what I'm comfortable with, but I want to kind of explore a little bit more and find more opportunities to find those moments where I can find the right lure in the right spot and kind of change it up a little bit from what it is that I typically do.
Yeah, totally. No, I totally agree with that. All right, so we've hit on rain slash precipitation pretty good here. I think we got that pretty covered as far as what we're gonna discuss here. I think we can move into the next one is gonna be temperature. So whether it
Yep.
be hot or cold, how are we planning for those temperatures, and then how is that gonna affect deer or hunting plan as we move forward, right? So first I'm gonna talk about hot weather, right? So personally, for me, beginning of the season tends to be warmer in this area, right? So we're talking like usually sometimes in the 70s, which is hot, right? For
Yeah.
me, I'll generally use thin clothes, right? So like thin poly layers, that lightweight pants, lightweight, more or less hiking boots, right? Keeping
Hmm.
things really thin, just so that it allows one additional mobility, two not working up too much of a sweat, right? Because that's something that you need to be cognizant about, especially in the hotter temperatures, right? So the more you sweat,
Yeah.
the more you're gonna stink, the more the deer are gonna smell you, right? So those are
Yeah.
those are like the
Oh
disadvantages
my
there.
gosh, I hadn't even thought of that. I hadn't even thought of the way that your sweat is going to end up impacting the deer's ability to be able to kind of like locate you
Oh
and
yeah.
and know that they're in danger. That's fascinating.
Absolutely. So then not only is it hot outside, but you have to be, cognizant of how much work you're putting in to get to the location you are. Because if you're really doing a lot of sweating, the odds of a deer smelling you are going to be increased, right? So, something to think about for sure. Um, Temperature effect on deer. Generally speaking, the deer are going to lay down. So they're not going to be as active in the hot weather, especially as you get into the fall and the hunting season, right? The deer are going to be they're going to be getting their winter layer of fur, right? So it's more or less like they're getting their winter coats on. And, I
Yep.
don't know how often you put on your winter coat and go hang out in 70-degree weather, but you're not going to want to be doing a whole lot of physical
Yeah.
activity.
Hmm.
So those deer are, generally speaking, going to be laying down. They will, however, generally go to water, right? So they're going
Okay.
to get thirsty because they're hot, right? And when that happens, they're going to move towards water. So as far as, planning for a hot weather hunt, being in an area that's near water, has access to water, can be beneficial in those regards, right? Because you know
Uh-huh.
that that's going to focus some of that deer activity towards that water, and you may have a better opportunity to see, like, the deer movement is going to be decreased, but if they are moving, there's a better chance that they're going to be moving in and around those water areas, which is
Yeah.
which is you're focusing some of those efforts, right? So it gives you a better opportunity in that regard. Impact on the hunting plan, as kind of indicated, right? One, try not to get too hot and sweaty because they're going to be able to smell you a little bit easier, and getting in an area where you can scout or sit near water or over water where you can see that water area can be beneficial because the deer are going to be moving in those areas as well.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to your hunting, obviously you're kind of restricted to the parameters of your season that you're hunting in.
Hmm.
Do you see much fluctuation in terms of temperature? I mean, you're talking about like 70-degree heat here with animals that have their winter coats on, but also the kind of like, do you see much fluctuation there? And could this fluctuate like from day to day? Obviously, I grew up in New England, so that I know that obviously I know that like the temperature can change that dramatically from day to day, but like do you see this more in terms of like trends and spells, or do you see this more from like day to day, and how might you be able to use that to your advantage?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, the beginning of the season is going to be warmer than the latter portion of the season, right? So October in New England is by and large going to be warmer than December, right? So
Right.
that's going to impact your, to some degree, it impacts your deer activity, right? So deer activity, if you're thinking like October, November, December, right? Those are really the three seasons of the hunting season. Um, peak is going to be in November, right? Mostly because of the rut. Rut activity is going to peak right in that first and second week in November. So, and it's kind of like a bell curve, right? So, starting in the beginning of October, that curve starts to go up. It peaks at beginning first and second week in November, and then it bell curves back down into the latter portion of the season,
Hmm.
right? So, deer activity is going to increase, but the warmer the temperature is, that's going to stagnate that activity mostly to evening hours, right? So as the
Okay.
sun goes down, the temperature cools off. Those deer are going to be more active
Yeah.
at in the nighttime, right? So that's basically what'll happen is if it's hot, more of that activity is going to be at night versus when it's cooler. The deer are able to move around during the day a little bit more because it's
There you
cooler. They
go.
feel a
Okay.
little bit better. Feel a little bit better during the day. But you're talking
Gotcha.
about some fluctuations, between hot and cold, and those will certainly increase your deer activity as well. So if you have a stretch of like hot weather days and all of a sudden you get a cool weather day, well, a lot of the time you're going to see a lot of deer on their feet, right? They've been laying down trying to conserve energy because it's been so hot for a number of days. All of
Hmm.
a sudden you get a cold weather day and all the deer are going to be up because they haven't been able to do that for the last few days because it's been too hot. Likewise, on the other side of things, right, if it's freezing cold and those deer have been laying down trying to conserve all their energy and stay warm for an extended period of time, if you get a hot day right after that, sometimes what'll happen
Hmm.
is the deer will all be up and moving again for the same exact reasons, right? So it's just trying to time and determine when you think the deer are going to be laying down trying to conserve their energy versus when you think they're going to be up and moving around.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. That totally makes sense.
And that's a kind of a good segue as we move into planning for cold weather, right? So it's kind of similar in a lot of ways, right? So kind of like extreme hot temperatures where those deer are going to lay down because they don't want to use their energy because they're too hot. Extreme cold is kind of the same idea. They they don't want to use up too much of their energy, but at the same time it works kind of in the opposite because if a deer is just going to lay down for the like in a really cold environment, they're gonna die, right? They need to move
Right.
around in order to have their energy up to get their heat up, kind of like we were talking about with wet weather, right? Um, the deer moving around, it increases their body temperature, keeps them a little bit warmer. The same reason why I like to change my stand in the middle of a cold or wet day, right? I get down, I walk to my other stand, I warm my body up, I'm a little bit less cold, right? So the deer are
Yeah.
kind of doing the same thing. Um, as far as clothes for the hunter, similar to wet weather, right? I like to use many layers. I'll use a base layer of like wool. I like to do kind of like a woolly or a wool poly sandwich. So it'd be like wool base layer, poly on top, wool on top of that. I feel like it
There you
tends
go.
to work pretty well for me. Everybody has kind of their own layering system and what works well for them. The key being you don't want to put on too many layers when you're walking in because you can get sweaty and then you run into a similar situation that you do in hot weather, right? That sweat smells, the deer are more likely to smell
Yeah.
you,
Mhm.
a little bit less likely to see those deer. Another thing that I like in really cold weather are these little things called like boot blankets. At least I call
Okay.
them boot blankets. And what they are basically just like oversized slippers that you like put over your boots and like zip them up. And they basically give you an extra insulation layer on your
Boot
boots.
slippers. I
Yeah,
love
they're
that.
boots.
That's
Yeah,
great.
they're great. They're awesome. I highly recommend them.
By
They
all being, if
yeah.
you're interested, this is a market that we'd like to get in on.
Yeah, exactly right. The ones I use are like no product placement here, but I think they're like Arctic Shield is the ones that we
Okay.
use. They're not they're not nothing crazy high tech. They're just an insulated insulated layer that you put over your boot.
Yeah.
But what I also do is like, and this is like we're talking sitting in your stand and it's like 10 degrees outside, so it's pretty chilly out. But what I'll also do is I'll take one of those hand warmers and I'll stuff it inside that boot slipper, like between the slipper and like on top
In
of
the
my
boot.
boot. Yeah,
Okay.
and it keeps your toes nice and warm, which is just wonderful when you're sitting in that stand and your toes are freezing.
Wow. Hmm.
So little hack there. I'll also bring a blanket in my bag, and that's for if I'm just totally frozen up there. My
Yeah.
opinion on layers and things like creature comforts in the stand is that if it's gonna allow me to sit out there for another hour, it's beneficial, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Uh-huh.
even if I'm a little bit more bulky up there or a little bit not as concealed as I would have been, an additional hour in the stand is
Yeah.
still better than not being there, which is what would have happened if I had not had that blanket, right? So
Yeah.
that
That makes sense.
tends to be
Hmm.
my opinion on that sort of thing. And then, yeah, hand warmers, yeah, they can be critically helpful. I like to run like those football muffs that quarterbacks have. It goes
Oh
like
yeah.
around their
Uh-huh.
waist, and you like
Hmm.
stick your hands in it. I'll use one of those with like a really thin layer of gloves, and then just stuff a couple hand warmers in there.
Okay.
And that's because I like to be able to feel the trigger on the bow release.
Uh-huh.
If I have like gloves that are super bulky, then like getting them in and out of that hand muff can be problematic. Two, when I go to grab the bow or grab the release, sometimes your fingers are super bulky. It can impact your shot too. So having that
Yeah.
muff allows me to, and those hand warmers, one allows me to keep my hands nice and warm because those hand warmers are there, but two allows me to have good control of the bow when it is time for me to take that shot, which is I
Hmm.
find to be a huge advantage in that regard.
Yeah, the last thing that you want is to be in a position where you have the deer there. It's a cold day, and so your hands are so frigid that you're not able to make the shot that you have right in front of you. So
Yeah,
I could see that. I could see that certainly playing a role.
for sure. And then, yeah, as far as cold weather impact on deer movement, generally cold is good for deer movement. As we said, they're wearing their winter jackets the whole time, so a little bit of cold weather doesn't really bother them. But they will try to move in order to stay warm, which is beneficial for the hunter, right? The more the deer is moving,
Hmm.
the more opportunity for the hunter to see the deer, more opportunity for an opportunity to take place ultimately. So cold days tend to be good for deer movement, which is nice. Usually, I'll try and schedule my hunts on days where I'm anticipating it to be a cooler day. Um, that tends to be beneficial for me, but I only have one similar to as you were saying, right, about predicting, weather and
Yeah.
fishing,
Uh-huh.
with precipitation. Same kind of goes for my situation as far as hunting, trying to predict my days off ahead of time. Ultimately, end up with, either it ends up being super hot or super cold. So you kind of
Yeah,
get,
it's kind of a crapshoot.
yeah, you play the hand you're dealt. You figure, it just gives you one more thing that you have to figure out before heading into the woods, right?
Yeah.
So,
Uh-huh.
but it
Uh-huh.
ultimately ends up, one way or another, you get out there, you get out into have yourself an adventure out there. So it ends up being okay.
Hmm.
But as far as impact on hunting plan, usually for me when it's really cold out, as I kind of said for wet weather stands, I'll try and break it up into a morning and afternoon hunt. So that way,
Hmm.
you get down, you walk around a little bit, it warms yourself up. It also gives you that opportunity again if you need to head back to the car. If you're totally frozen, you can get back there, warm yourself up back in the car, head over to your afternoon stand, and you end up being nice and warm before moving into the evening and then potentially setting yourself up for an opportunity then. So,
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Now, you're talking about kind of the cold impact on the deer and the cold impact on you. Um, does it? And of course, when it comes to hunting of the, especially up in the New England area and up north, I know it gets really cold. Is there ever a time where it gets so cold that they're not able to, or they're not willing rather to move around? Does the the freezing cold temperatures ever play such a role that they're not able to that they're not willing to move themselves around?
yeah, I mean, I think ultimately the cold weather for them is really only going to increase their movement. I mean, to the point that they have to move around in order to stay warm. Like if they can't go inside and get warmed up, right? I mean, I think they need to move. They have to stay warm in order to survive. Their only other option is lay down and die, right?
Right.
So I mean, I think ultimately, does it impact their willingness to move? It actually ultimately increases their willingness to move because they need to. There's not really anything that they can do other than, move around and eat that's going to help them to get any warmer, basically, right? So I guess that is kind of like a roundabout way of answering that question. But yeah,
Yeah, no, that
ultimately
makes
they,
sense.
they, they need to move in order to stay alive. And they do, like, feeding, having a lot of calories on their body. So like a bigger deer, right, is obviously more likely to survive a harsh cold winter than a deer that doesn't have as much weight on it, right? Which is
Right.
ultimately why you see a lot of heavier, bigger bodied deer in the northern terrains, right? So Maine tend to have a lot of like larger bodied deer, right? There aren't as many of them because a lot of anything that's smaller ultimately is not going to be able to last those harsh
Yeah.
winters, right? It's
Hmm.
too cold
No,
for
that
them to
makes perfect
survive.
sense.
So
Hmm.
that's kind of how natural selection ultimately plays a
Yeah.
role in how these deer are going to be able to survive, right?
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense.
But moving into, just a couple examples of both of these, right? The hot weather and cold weather hunts. Hunting in hot weather, right? I've generally seen, I've seen significantly decreased activities, right? So the last couple of years, early season hunting, I saw virtually no deer in the early season, and it mostly has to do with the fact that it's been like 70 plus degrees when I've been out there, and all the deer are kind of just sitting around. So I took that information like 2 years ago, right? Did these sits. It was super hot weather. I didn't see anything. So I said, like the following year, instead of just sitting there and waiting for a deer to come in the hot weather where they're most likely not going to, I'll at least do a little bit of scouting and walk around, see if I can find some new areas that may be more lucrative for during the season. So that's the strategy I took last year, and it did allow me to see a little bit more terrain. I got a little bit more scouting, but ultimately I didn't see any deer that way either. So I think it was a benefit in one way because I got additional scouting in there on a day that I probably wasn't going to see much deer anyway. So
Yeah,
so that was
that makes
good.
sense.
And then as far as cold weather, I just try and sit tight and stay warm the best I can, right? Those blankets and hand warmers certainly try to help. But sometimes, breaking it up into a morning and afternoon hunt tends to be a good idea, at least for me, as far as one, breaking it up mentally, and two, getting yourself warmed up. One thing I haven't touched on regarding cold weather is south facing slopes. So,
Mm.
if
Hmm.
you're familiar with how the earth is tilted, right, south facing slopes are going to get sun more than, let's say, north facing slopes, right? Just because of the angle of the earth and where we're located on the planet. Those south facing slopes ultimately get a little bit more warmth and ultimately are a little warmer. So if you're looking on a map and trying to figure out where you want to hunt and it's going to be a cold day, those south facing slopes are a great place to start if you can see
Oh
some
my gosh.
terrain features that are working on there as well. You,
We're talking about the slant of the planet here, Pat,
yeah,
and using that to our advantage. If there was ever a question as to whether we were going to be pulling out every stop, whether we were going to be using every card to our advantage to be able to hunt these animals, there it is right there. We're talking about the slant of the planet, and we're talking about southward facing slopes. So
yep,
there you have it, folks. I mean,
exactly.
we are pulling out every card that we have to be able to use these things that we know to our advantage.
Hey,
It's awesome. It's
it's
great. I love it. I
it's
absolutely love it.
any advantage that we can have moving into the woods, because ultimately the deer has all the advantages, right? I mean, they can smell better than us, they can see better than us, they can hear better than us. I mean, they can't see better than us in all terrains, but as far as movement goes, and especially at low light environments, the deer have the advantage in that
Yeah.
regard too. So
Oh, for sure.
anything we can do to boost our odds is gonna be beneficial. So yes, south facing slopes are gonna be warmer, so that's something to key in on cold days. Also, the leeward side, right? So that's the side of the hill that's not getting the wind, right? If you're talking about somebody who's going to try and stay warm, or a deer who's going to try and stay warm, they're going to want to be on the that leeward side because they're not going to have that wind blowing on them, right? So if you can find a south facing leeward side of a hill that has some good cover, that's a great place to start as if you're looking into a place where a deer might be hiding during a cold weather stint like that. So great place to plan to set up in that regard.
No, and listen, I mean, I know I'm kind of like half joking here as we're talking about the slant of the planet, but at the same time, it's kind of what it is that I love about this. It's that kind of like how temperature is impacting the tactics, knowing where it is that they're going to be, and hotter temperatures being near the water, being right and matching those tactics with kind of like with what it is that you are predicting that the animal is going to do. I just love that about outdoor sports, and I love that about hunting and fishing. And it's one of those things where I've been making all the analogies, so why stop now? In the world of like sports betting and things like that, there's a certain point of kind of like being right, and I think that comes into play. There's a certain aspect of gambling when it comes into hunting and fishing and stuff like that. But there's also the kind of like the hunt and being right and being able to kind of like plan it out. And when things end up falling into place the way that you had predicted and the way that it is that you had thought that it was going to end up happening, that's really where it is that I see so much kind of like glory that ends up coming from hunting and fishing. And like, if you were to go out there and be predicting that you want to be putting your tree stand in a place because you've had like a lot of really hot days in a row, and so you figure that the fish are going to be moving, or the fish, the deer are going to be moving their way towards like a water source in order to be able to keep themselves cool and get themselves and keep themselves hydrated. And so you put your tree stand right there, and then you see a deer that's coming right into your shot in order to be able to do exactly what it is that you thought they were going to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where the kind of the fun of this can be, and I really like that. Very early on in these episodes, Pat, I think it might have even been in the first episode, we were talking about how at the family hunting camp there is a we have a lot of men in the family that go on the hunting trip right after for opening day in Pennsylvania, deer hunting season, right after Thanksgiving, and they kind of like go to the same spots and and are putting themselves in a position where they've seen some luck in the past, but aren't necessarily using all of the information that they have at their disposal in order to be able to put themselves in the most advantageous position that year during those particular weather conditions at that particular time to be able to be successful. And I think that that's where a lot of the fun and the glory can come in with hunting. And I don't want this to sound critical in terms of family members that we have, or anybody that's hunting in the same spots that they really like, that they've seen success in the past. I mean, heck, I have the fishing spots that are on Lake Kiwi that I will go to every single time that I'm going fishing, if I'm going out at a particular time, in order to be able to try and catch fish. And so I think that we're all kind of like creatures of habit to a certain degree. But what I liked about one of the things that you said in an earlier episode is that there's not much fun to kind of just like being told to go and go to this spot and sit in this tree and look at this time and see if you can get a deer, right? I think that a lot of the fun of this and a lot of the glory of this and a lot of the beauty of this, to use the analogy that I used before, a lot of the poetry of this is trying to kind of like find where it is that you can use those predictions and those kind of moments of those intersections of a lot of these factors that we're talking about in order to try and be successful in your endeavor of catching a fish, or being able to be successful in hunting. And so the that I kind of want to call back to something that you had said earlier on, in that I think it was actually the first episode of this podcast, when I think that there's that if you're kind of just like going to the same spot, or kind of like following somebody's instructions to go to this spot and stand here and wait for the deer to come, you're kind of missing out on a lot of the fun that these outdoor sports can be. And
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I think that that's part of it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it kind of all depends on what you're looking to get out of it, right? I mean, if you're talking about somebody who's just getting into hunting, they want to, they want that camp experience. They're there more for the camp environment and, the experience of getting into the woods and, going hunting. And, they may get a deer and they may not. And ultimately,
Mhm.
if that isn't going to impact their fun level, right? If
Yeah,
whether they get the deer or not isn't going to impact if they had a good time. And ultimately, likewise, if I get a deer or not, it's not going to impact if I had a good time either. But it's looking for different things, right? I think
right.
and a lot of folks will sit the same stand, and it
Hmm.
can be lucrative. I mean, a lot of the times, right? There's a reason that those habitual historic stands are the stands that people go to every year, and that's because people see deer, right? Now,
Yeah,
there's usually a reason for that, right? The folks sitting those historical stands may not know it, but maybe there's a historical rub that's 50 yards down the road that they didn't notice, or maybe the that historical stand is only good every 3 years. Well, it happens to be that there's an oak tree that only has acorns every 3 years, right? They haven't
right.
put the
Hmm.
two and two together yet, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad stand, right? And
Yeah,
likewise, it doesn't necessarily mean that, one, hunter person experience is better than another, right? It's just a matter of what somebody is looking to get out of it. If you want to get up and sit that stand that you've sat for the last 20 years and try and shoot a deer, awesome. That's great on you.
yeah.
If you want to try and figure out what the deer is doing and the reason why that stand is a good one, that's also cool too. And that's really where I start to enjoy a lot of the hunting experience, is trying to figure out like the problem, right? It's like instead of it just being, go into the woods, find the deer, shoot the deer, it's solve the problem, figure out why the
Yeah.
deer is there,
Mhm.
and then be in that opportune situation in order to make that happen, right?
And and there's a lot of like cause and effect that comes into that too. And I think that like being able to identify that cause and effect, the temperature is hotter, the deer are going to be making their way towards the water in order to keep themselves hydrated and to be able to keep themselves cool. Being able to kind of like see the cause and the effect is where that kind of like the aha, I was right moment comes in.
Exactly.
And so, and we all like to be right, but when it comes to being right and being able to also like get yourself a deer, I mean that's like the creme de la creme.
Absolutely.
So I think that there is the like being able to identify that cause and effect, or see kind of like this is what it is that's manifesting in terms of what it is that I'm seeing with deer, and this is what it is that might be causing it. Let me see how it is that I can use that to my advantage. That's the fun of it.
Absolutely. But yeah, so
So
Mike, how does these temperature differences, hot and cold, do they play a similar role as we move into fishing as it does with hunting?
It does play a role. It plays a very significant role. And so I mean, it can play a role in terms of like catching a fish or not catching a fish. It can play a role in terms of catching 20 fish versus catching zero fish. I mean, the temperature really does. It can play a really significant role. Now, being down in Georgia, sometimes that temperature difference can mean different temperatures in terms of the time of the year. We have a very great and a large span in terms of temperature over the course of the year. In the winter months, oftentimes it is getting down into the 20s and teens, versus in the summer times, it's oftentimes getting up into the upper 90s and sometimes even into the hundreds. I mean, that difference, it's like you're on a different planet.
Hmm.
And so the different temperatures do very much play a significant role. And so while like the what can be very I'll kind of call back to what I was saying before, that the world on the surface isn't necessarily the same as the world that's down underneath the water. Whereas when you're hunting, that is the case, that you're experiencing the same naturing
Mm-hmm.
that the deer is. When it comes to fish, that's not necessarily the case. But what can be, well, on the surface, like the precipitation can be very disruptive and can mean that you're either going out onto the lake or not, and the fish are none the wiser down at 20 feet. The hot temperature can really play a significant role, and it can
Mm-hmm.
be far more disruptive to to the fish and what it is that they're doing. So I think it was just this past year, I wasn't going to be going on this guided fishing tour. I couldn't, as much as I love them. I had gone on one earlier on in the summer, and I didn't feel comfortable going on a second and being away from the kids and with the family on,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of taking that spot where there are other in-laws and aunts and uncles and grandkids that could have been on that trip. And so
Yeah.
I had kind of like I had said that I was going to be going on the fishing trip in the earlier part of the summer, and there was one in kind of like mid to late July this past year, that we ended up getting a call, I say we, I wasn't actually going to be going on the trip, but my father-in-law ended up getting a call from Steve, the guide that we use, and he said, you might want to postpone a couple of days because the weather had been so hot.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking like a week and a half of like mid to upper 90s
Wow.
in Georgia, and I mean anywhere that's going to be hot.
Mm-hmm.
But the temperature had been affecting the fish, and so the guide was saying that he wasn't confident in the haul that they were going to be able to have as he normally would be,
Mm-hmm.
and so he kind of like gave the warning of like, I'm not positive that we're going to be able to see the amount of success that we normally do. The weather's been so ridiculously hot. There
Mm-hmm.
hadn't been much rain to kind of like cool things down, even in the intermediary. Now, I will say that one of the first things that I noticed coming down and living down here in the South, there are a couple of things that are different in Georgia and different in the South than they are up north. One, the South is on a different level of bug. So let me just say that like the bugs are on like a prehistoric level down here, and so like the cockroaches and the bugs, it's like a different world down here. I'd never seen a cockroach until I moved down into the South, and now it's like a monthly basis that you'll see cockroaches. If you're living like anywhere in the South, and you're a listener at home, I'm sure that you'll be able to attest to this as well. But the South is on a different level of bug. The South is on a different level of barbecue.
Mm-hmm.
Barbecue is something that's different down in the South.
Yep, I can
Uh,
attest to that one.
it's different and it's amazing. Sweet tea is amazing down here as well. But another big thing is that when it rains up north, and Pat, I'm sure that you can attest to this, especially during the summer months, things can get really, really hot. It can get into the 80s, 90 degrees, and then it'll rain. And then the temperature will drop down to like 70 degrees,
Mm-hmm.
and all as a result of the rain. In the South, in the summer months especially, when it rains, it actually gets hotter and it
Oh
gets
wow.
more humid. And so it'll be like 80 degrees or so, 80, 85 degrees, 90 degrees, and it'll rain. And the first couple of times that happened to me, I was expecting to go back outside and have it be like much, much cooler, having it drop like degrees or so. It actually gets hotter.
Wow.
And so the fact that there wasn't as much, the fact that there wasn't as much rain doesn't really matter as much in the
Mm-hmm.
South, but it had been like this really hot spell this past summer for like a week and a half, and ultimately the guide wasn't sure that we were going to be able to be successful, or that my family was going to be successful on this guided trip. Nevertheless, my father-in-law wanted to bring out a couple of the grandkids out on this trip, and so normally before 8 o'clock, 8:30 or so on this trip, and we're getting out there to be out on the water by 6,
Mm-hmm.
we will have caught probably like 25 to 30 fish or so by that point.
Wow.
And by the time that they were getting out there this past summer, I don't know if on this trip they had caught anything before like 8:30 or so.
Wow.
And they did end up catching a couple of fish, but the temperature can really impact it. And so fish are now it's kind of a mixed bag because spotted bass and bass typically are favorable in warmer temperature water environments. And so if you're in a water environment where things are a little bit on the warmer side, typically bass really like that.
Hmm.
Now that changes and goes in the other direction when you have a week and a half where things are really hot. Kind of like you were saying with deer, they
Hmm.
get very lethargic, and kind of like humans do, and when the temperatures get hot, when the temperatures are hot long enough for it to be making a difference in the lake temperature down 15-20 feet,
Hmm.
meaning that it's been hot for a week and a half, 2 weeks, and it's been consistently hot, then the fish get very lethargic. And I think that that's what ended up happening last summer is that we kind of hit this spell, and the fish weren't as active as they normally were. And so long spells of temperature, and that's part of why I wanted to ask when you were talking about hunting, whether you're talking more about spells and trends, or if you're talking about day to day,
Hmm.
because day to day isn't enough to affect 20 feet down the temperature of the lake.
Yeah.
But 2 weeks at a time, that temperature can really add up. And so temperature, at least last summer, definitely played a role there. When it comes to kind of like the colder temperatures, you'll see that over the course of the year, colder temperatures can mean different things for different fish. A couple of years ago, my father-in-law and one of my brother-in-laws, actually, we went on a like an early spring. It's kind of like more late winter. It was in like middle of February. We went
Hmm.
on a trip up to Lake Hartwell. It was a guided trip, and the temperatures were colder, obviously, but we were looking for different fish. We were actually trying to catch crappie,
Hmm.
which is a terrible name for a fish, but it's actually a delicacy. It's a really good fish. It's a really
Hmm.
delicious fish, and they kind of look a little bit more like bluegill, Pat.
Okay.
They're kind of like a more stout fish, but they're almost kind of they're very flavorful. They're kind of like a white fish,
Hmm.
and so it's this kind of delicious hybrid between kind of like a bluegill, but also like the white fishiness of like a cod or a haddock or even kind of like a bass, and they're really considered a delicacy. And so we had originally gone out planning on fishing for crappie. It turned into a striper and bass fishing trip because the temperatures actually were a little bit warmer. It was unseasonably warm, and so we actually had a little bit more luck with that. Those fish, stripers,
Hmm.
bass, hybrids, that really kind of prefer and are a little bit more active in that warmer temperature. And so, even going into like the week of, we weren't sure whether we were going to be crappie fishing or if we were going to be bass fishing,
Hmm.
because we weren't sure what it was going to mean for the fish. But it turned out that we had some unseasonable warmth, and that the bass were hitting and the stripers were hitting, and so we were very successful. We ended up catching like 30 or 40 fish that trip, between my father-in-law, me, and my brother-in-law, and it was a great trip. It was actually the trip that I caught, Pat. I'll have to send you the picture. Like the biggest fish that I've ever caught. I caught
Nice.
a striped bass that was huge, and I've got the picture of it, of me kind of like holding it in the clamps, and it was in this day that we were catching all of these fish, and they were very active because it was unseasonably warm. So
Hmm.
you can kind of play that a little bit, and of course the guide is so much better at knowing where to go for these
Yeah.
particular instances and at these particular temperatures and at these depths. But it was a very successful trip, and it was due in part to us kind of manipulating the temperature there a little bit. When it comes to things like kayaking and canoeing, I'm typically not going out there in the colder months or in
Hmm.
colder water. I think I was maybe scared a little bit away of the being tipped into the Chattahoochee River. That story that you can listen to a previous episode and hear about, probably the coldest that I've ever been. But I tend to not go out there on the colder months for that kind of
Yeah.
reason. But and I'm gonna make yet another kind of connection here, but Pat and I both are fans of Stephen King's Dark Tower series, the Behemoth seven book Dark Tower series by King. But I've been listening to a podcast about it. I finished the series up a little while ago, and I've been listening to a podcast about it. And so maybe it's because of that, but I'm really keen on these moments of kind of like transition, and whether it's a moment of transition in hunting between like different temperatures coming in or out of a storm, the barometric pressure that you're able to kind of like use to your advantage there, or when it comes to fishing, these kind of like these time periods, whether you're looking at the fall time being this transition in between the well ultimately the spawning season for the fall and the spring, but kind of this transition into hot and cold weather. And I don't know. I think that it's important in literature, these moments of transition, and I think it's also important in fishing. These moments of transition. I've talked already about kind of like depth and wanting to find kind of like feeding grounds that are this moment of transition between really deep water and really shallow water. And I'm just fascinated by kind of these transitions and how they can be used to your advantage in fishing. But ultimately, like the depth of the water is going to end up playing a role in that temperature as well. And so knowing that the temperature at the surface of the water is a little bit more unseasonably warm, well, you're going to want to, if you're trying to catch like a trout that tends to favor the colder temperatures, you're going to need to kind of drop that depth a little bit more in order to be able to find where the fish are. Obviously fish finders are very helpful for things like that, but they're not infallible.
Hmm.
And so you can kind of you can find yourself in a situation where you're looking at your fish finder being like, well, there's nothing on here, and indeed there isn't, because the fish are not in that particular location because the depth and the temperature isn't right.
Yeah.
But the temperature and the can be affected by storms as well. But the kind of like trying to mirror that moment, you can use all the technology that you want to your advantage that you can, but ultimately the fish are either there or they're not.
Hmm.
But it is when I think that the time of day you can kind of play around with the temperature there a little bit as well. And so I caught my first trout fishing in the evening. Now, again, trout are a little bit more of a colder weather or a colder temperature fish. And so I caught my first trout trolling through the middle of Lake Kiwi, not the middle, northern part of Lake Kiwi, but it was in the evening. And so the temperature, and it was at the end of kind of like a colder spell, temperature had gone down quite a bit, and so we were kind of like trolling through, but my lure must have been down at probably like 30 feet. I had like the deepest possible diving lure, and I had this thing back. It must have been it was far too far back. It was probably like 60 yards. I had this thing. That's too far. But it was super far back that I had this lure, and so it was getting down there into like the like 25 feet. I'm convinced, kind of like depth in order to be able to try and catch this. In order to try and catch this trout, and we did. We kind of went right by this feeding ground, and I ended up catching a trout in kind of in this lower part of the lake, because the temperature was lower in the evening, and because the it was after a storm, so things got a little bit cooler with that. It was at the end of kind of like a cold spell of a couple of days, and the lure was deeper down into those cooler waters, and so it's kind of that combination of the right lure at the right depth at the right time that we're talking about, where it was successful. Pat, I know that your fake worm kind of falls into that category as well that you're using. Now, not at the same depth, but being able to use kind of like the right lure at the right moment, right in the aftermath of a storm. It's kind of those transitions that I'm talking about, coming right out of a storm or right at the end of like the day in this evening time. It's another one of those transitions um, that you can use to your advantage. Looking into the summer, I wanna do a little bit more evening fishing.
Hmm.
Most of the fishing that I do is in the morning because it's a little bit more controllable, especially with the kiddos. It's a little bit easier to be able to know that if I can just get myself up early enough, if I can
Hmm.
just get myself up at 5:30, I can be out and hopefully back by the time I can be helpful with the kids by the time that they're getting up. Versus in the evening, a lot of times it's a little bit trickier. Now with the later sunset, like it's still possible, but the evening fishing can be a little bit tricky. But that's something that I'm hoping to do maybe a little bit more of, because again, it's another one of those transitions that I want to kind of use to my advantage.
Yeah, totally. We've talked a lot about transitions. I think transitions, hot to cold, transitions from, rain to no rain. I mean, as we move into other aspects too, right? Terrain transitions, transitions of brushy area versus not brushy area, of morning to afternoon. I mean, there are just so many transitions, and pretty much all of them point to additional activity from either fish or deer. So I think that's certainly something to key in on when you're making your plan, as well as dealing with either temperatures or precipitation as well.
Yeah.
But Mike, we've had some really good conversation here. Obviously, this one is a little bit longer than our previous episodes, but
Yeah.
as I said in the beginning, right? I mean, these topics are things we could really do a pretty extensive deep dive into, and maybe
Yeah.
we will as we move into some of the latter episodes as well. There's a lot here. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of things to discuss, and these are things that you could discuss ad nauseum, right? I mean, everybody's going to have their
Yeah.
own opinion on how to tackle any specific situation, right? So it's just,
Hmm.
additional things to talk about and things to mull over. So certainly a pretty exciting one.
Yep. Now, I will say this, Pat. I wanted to save this until the end of the episode, but we have had, I'm convinced, two baby deer that were actually born. I'm convinced, Pat, that it was in our backyard, because I was out there. I was talking before about some of like the yard work and stuff that
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing. I was kind of like raking to make way for the pathway that I've kind of just like installed in the backyard up to our garden, and there was no less than maybe 20 feet away from me, up against our house, there was a baby deer that
Oh,
was, I mean, we're talking maybe a week old.
yeah.
I mean, this thing was tiny and was
Mm-hmm.
was kind of like up against the house. And so I called my 3-year-old over because she was out there with me, and we saw this. I mean, my my 3-year-old was convinced that it was dead. She was like, "Is it dead, Dad?" I was like, "No, it's still moving. Like you can see its nose is still moving there." But we had seen, my wife and I had seen like a doe that was super super close to the house before, and we couldn't understand why that doe would be as close as it was.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it turns out that I'm pretty sure that there were two deer that we ended up seeing another one that was kind of like in another part of our backyard. That I'm pretty sure that they were born in our backyard,
Mm-hmm.
and because our backyard is pretty it's pretty confined, and there's kind of like a fence that goes all the way around it. And so they didn't have a way of being able to get out, so we had like left our gates open to try and like encourage the deer to be able to make their way out, also to encourage the mother to come back and be able to kind of like make her way back to these two baby deer. But I think that it was 2 days ago where I looked out the back kind of like screened in porch area, and these two little baby deers are just like making their way past my grills right up to the screened in porch. And Pat, you were here not too long ago, so kind of like how small that little like
Yeah.
courtyardy area is. Pat, they came all the way up. This one doe's nose was up against our door. I mean, it came all the way up to, if I had opened up the door, it would have walked into our screened
Oh
in
my
porch. I
goodness.
mean, its nose was brushed up against. It was pushing up against our flapping door that
Mm-hmm.
that you go into in order to come into the screened in porch, and they were just like they were so hopeless. They were so that they're just like wandering around. And so like my wife and I, obviously we took the pictures and everything, but they made their way back to kind of like an area of a little bit more coverage. We've been getting a lot of rain, and so they were kind of like underneath a little bit more protected underneath the trees. We left our gates open, and think just this morning, they had kind of like made their way out through our gates and into our neighbor's lawn. They had on like the Ring camera. They had seen the
Hmm.
like a doe with a little baby deer, with a little fawn. So yeah, I didn't want to bring it up earlier on, that I have had like literally could have opened up my door and been petting a deer. But they really are in abundance down here in Georgia, Pat. So we gotta have you come down here and see what you can do about our overpopulation of deer. See if you might be
Yeah.
able to use your bow in order to be able to help us out with that.
For sure, yeah. That is the time of the year. The fawns are dropping. They're being born. This is when that happens. I got plenty of fun facts on that, but we could save that for another episode too. But yeah, no, it's a very vulnerable time for the does and the fawns right now because they're being born and they are pretty helpless at this stage. So,
Yeah.
but it looks like those ones are in good shape and certainly building up the population there in Georgia, and
Yep.
certainly a pretty cool story for sure.
Yeah. Hmm.
All right, well, team, I think this has been a pretty good episode here. We got a lot of good information. We got a lot of good tactics here, some good
Hmm.
fishing and hunting stories. I think this is a good one. Mike, any parting words here?
No, no, that's I think we've shared it all, Pat. I think we've got over the course of this episode, we've got all of our thoughts down, or there's still more that we could share. I know we were talking before about kind of like deep diving in here, but I really enjoyed talking about all of these different moments of those intersections where tactics and nature end up meeting one another. And so I think that at this point we've covered our grounds, and I hope you guys listening at home enjoyed it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, for you guys at home, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this one. Again, if you have any comments or questions or anything, please reach out over the social medias or send us a DM or send us a comment or anything on that. We'll be sure to take that under advisement, see if we can do anything on that regard. But yeah, we're gonna wrap this one here. So until next time, get outside, have some fun out there. Thanks for listening to the East Coast Hunt, Fish, Hike podcast. If you have questions, comments, or have an idea for an episode, feel free to follow us and reach out over social media. Don't forget to rate, review, or tell your friends about the podcast. And until you hear from us again, get outside, have some fun out there.